Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Well, listen, as millions of Americans know now, you predicted the commercial failure of Brokeback Mountain a few weeks ago. Now, a less innovative journalist than you might have actually gone to see the movie before predicting how it would do.
Oh, no.
But that's not your style, is it?
The whole point was not a commentary on the movie, which I conceded was probably good, but a commentary on that people shouldn't be guilt-tripped if they don't go to see it, and furthermore that a lot of people probably won't go to see it because heterosexual men don't have a particular desire to spend their discretionary income going to see a gay love story.
That's a kind of defensive tone I hear there, but in any event, you did go spend some of your discretionary.
I did, and I would have anyway, but now it's deductible. It didn't do too well yesterday, by the way. I'm looking at the box office numbers. It's down dramatically, though the all movies are down dramatically, and the theater was filled. So and with people that of all sexes and no evidence of a bias toward one sexual orientation or another. It's a pretty good movie. It's not a great movie. This idea that it's a story of universal love is a little stretched. And I also thought it was a semi-propagandistic movie for gay marriage, although very subtle.
How subtle? I mean, what is the closest it comes to advocating gay marriage?
Well, it's all about how these guys' lives are all screwed up because they're in love with each other, supposedly, and they can't settle down because they're worried about getting killed Matthew Shepard style. We're not even talking about...
Well, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have to legalize gay marriage to stave off that fate.
Right, but there's a little scene at the end where the Heath Ledger character, his daughter's getting married, and I thought the implication was, gee, it's a great day for her, why couldn't he have that day? That's... On the other hand, since he has a daughter from a fake, from a heterosexual marriage he had, it's also an argument for staying in the closet.
Yeah.
So basically, I had no homophobic reaction. I didn't have the ick factor you talked about. No ick
that's
factor.
Significant. That's another dashed prediction for you, right? Because
right. Well, in part because it had been hyped as brutal thunderbolt sex, and I missed the brutal thunderbolt sex. And
was there smooching?
Oh, there's definite sex, but
it didn't. You didn't feel queasy.
I didn't feel queasy because I knew it was coming, and it was so unsexy. I mean, the basic problem with the movie is that it only comes alive after Jake Gyllenhaal is dead. He's just badly miscast as he's just terrible. He's a wimp. You don't understand why anybody would fall in love with him. And since that's
you probably would have had trouble with that in any event, right?
But no, you could have had like a guy who was so good looking and charismatic and wonderful in many ways that you understood what Heath Ledger saw in him. You don't. That's the motive of the whole story. Supposedly Heath Ledger is so smitten with this guy that his enduring love screws up everybody's life, and you just don't feel it. I didn't expect. I expect to feel some affection or hey, that guy is winning or something. Jake Gyllenhaal has no redeeming virtues as far as I can see.
Ang Lee says he's the next Paul Newman.
He's Brentwood, California's contribution to the destruction of the American theater, along with his sister. It's a tragic family.
Have you seen Donnie Darko?
He was good in Donnie Darko. I agree with that. But anyway, the movie only gets good after he's dead, and the sex wasn't sexy enough to gross me out. So that's my that's my reaction. It's a good movie, not a great movie, because one of the leads is bad.
That's how I know when something's really sexy. It grosses me out. That's my working definition.
Well, Bob...
no, I'm just commenting on the paradox built into your whole frame of interpretation. But what can you do about you doing the best a heterosexual man can do, I guess, under the circumstances.
I don't think if it's a big success, you can say, well, we should recount the last election because the Democrats have now won. I don't think if it's a failure, people, will say, well, it's a product of homophobia. It's a pretty good movie, and it'll get pretty good results.
But the hope you were clinging to at last sighting was that it would still be a failure in the red states, and you could say, I kind of told you so, even if it grosses $50 million.
Right, and I still cling to that hope because, while Heath Ledger is great, I don't think it doesn't seem like a red state movie to me.
Well, we'll see.
Yes. Sorry for the wishy-washy B+ report.
No. We expect candor. We got it. So is it bell time?
It's bell time. Okay.
Now, Mickey, as you know, we are going to be giving out from time to time these most transparent primate awards, given to the person who most glaringly fails in an attempt to conceal a quest for status or power. And I'd like to nominate for our first issuing of that award, Newt Gingrich, who was on the Charlie Rose show not so long ago. And I want to show you this clip of him claiming that he does not want to be president of the United States.
How does one go about deciding, if they have your political experience, going about making a decision to run for president? U.S. News and World Report said Newt is back.
Yeah, well, that's, it was a nice article. They were very flattering. I think if you've had my experience, if you've been Speaker of the House, helped create a majority, did the contract with America, and you care passionately about ideas, your real attitude is, I'm not going to run if it's avoidable. That my job is to develop new solutions, to communicate those solutions, to make them available to every candidate in both parties, and to really try to say for the country, this is where we need to be. Now, if at some point it's unavoidable, then you run. But I think you do that. You
prefer not to run than to run?
Absolutely. I prefer to develop solutions and ideas and try to help other people do a great job.
Now, the interesting thing about that, to me, is, one common form of pseudo-demurral from people who actually want to be president is to inject a note of kind of false humility. Well, if it should happen that any of my strengths could benefit this nation, then it would be remiss of me not to consider blah, blah. Gingrich is kind of the opposite. I mean, he's too good to be president. He's too smart, It would be a tragedy for the nation if his precious brain power were diverted into the mundane day-to-day task of being president. He just wants to think the great thoughts that guide presidents and other political leaders. So he's not the philosopher king. He's kind of Plato himself. And if you have any doubts about his self-esteem, look at one more clip where he's encouraging the Democrats, or saying the Democrats would be wise to more fully emulate the contract with America strategy that he pioneered in the early 90s.
And I think it's a very logical thing for him to try to do. I mean, if I were the opposition party, I would look very seriously at the most successful opposition campaign in modern times.
The campaign you led.
Right.
Okay, so there it is. More evidence that there is such thing as too much serotonin. So that's just a nomination, Mickey. I don't know.
I have two comments. First, what troubles me is if we give an award for the most conspicuous failure or concealed desire for status, it implies that the way to live your life is to conceal your desire for status, which is a larger problem I have with your evolutionary psychology view of the world. I still can't figure out what the right way to live is, since even living the right way will inevitably be a product of our drive for status and power.
I recommend pursuing a path of false humility while occasionally making ironic, self-conscious references to how false it is.
Well, that's one path, which one of us may have chosen. But isn't the best thing Gingrich could do is say he's running for president because it's the top job, which is what JFK said,
or because that's where the chicks are, or something.
Yeah. It seems like there is no good way. Is there a good way to run for president?
No, it's a tough job. I guess in a way my point is that he's failing at the most pragmatic level. I mean, don't you think this is so conspicuous, and his self-regard is so conspicuous, that he's not even doing himself a favor?
Well, 2 points. First, it's a defensive move. In other words, by saying he's too good for president, he's setting himself up for losing. because then he can say, well, I never did want to be president anyway. I always wanted to be at the AEI think tank thinking these grand thoughts. The second thing is that the Darwinian carrot in this case is causing him to do a good thing, which is he is the guy who is pissing all over the Republicans in the Abramoff scandal and saying, look, don't just try to pass a little bunch of cosmetic lobbying reforms. You can't have corrupt lobbyists without corrupt members of Congress. Basically saying it goes to the heart of Tom DeLay's leadership. I'm sure he has Darwinian reasons for wanting to revenge against Tom DeLay. But yet he is serving a function of raising an important issue.
Well, that would lead us directly into the Abramoff scandal if it weren't for the fact that I want to briefly relive the high point of my journalistic career, which involves Newt Gingrich.
Okay.
It was where...
it doesn't involve a urinal, I hope. And
what's that? No, that was just Kissinger.
Okay, good.
That was a brush with greatness. This was much more gratifying. When I found out that something I had written had really gotten under Gingrich's skin, and he remembered it bitterly 2 years after I'd written it. This is from a 1996 column by Maureen Dowd in the New York Times. He says, Mr. Gingrich says the Democrats were out to get him, recalling a 1994 New Republic column by Robert Wright exhorting, quote, I say we beat the noxious little butterball to a pulp, end quote. Now, I don't know why he took that personally, Mickey. And I would say that in context, it was a much subtler line than it sounds like, jerked out of context. It was actually quite funny, in the view of some people.
And your bringing up this column is different from Gingrich boasting on Charlie Rose because...
No, it's
you're
the
doing
opposite.
with
I'm not
subtle
claiming
irony?
I don't want to bring it up. I would have said, Mickey, please don't make me bring up. But I didn't say that.
I think we have to give you the Gorilla Award next week.
No, I'm the most self-disclosing primate. I wanted to bring it up to elevate my stature in the public eye, and I guess my question to you is, how did I do?
You did okay. You were a little short on the self-deprecation front, I'd say.
That comes at the end.
Mix a little more in next time.
Okay, sorry. Anyway, this Abramoff thing. You've been reading the stories.
I have.
Unlike me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's a little unclear to me what he did wrong, because every time I hear a thing about it on the radio, it's somebody talking about how what he did is representative of the ongoing corruption in Washington that isn't actually, for the most part, illegal. So it sounds like Kinsley's law of scandal, that what's scandalous isn't the illegal things done in Washington, it's what's legal.
Right.
So what did he do that was illegal?
There are two questions. The first is what he did only different as a matter of degree from what's done in Washington every day? In other words, every day lobbyists buy pizzas for congressmen and their aides. He gave $50,000 to the wife of a congressional aide. It's just a question of how awful, as Bruce Reed said in Slate, it's just a question he's guilty of price gouging.
Right.
And the second question is, if it's just part of this spectrum, business as usual, is there anything that one could do about it, or does it require some larger, impossible culture change? The first question is, he did do a little more than, I think there was a qualitative difference. He's involved in a scandal in Miami involving the forging, setting up phony documents, which is not part of the ordinary business of Washington, and the cruise ship owner who he feuded with was later rubbed out in a mafia-style hit, which is also not business as usual. He may not be guilty, but he's embroiled with some characters that Clark Clifford and Edward Bennett Williams weren't, and the great lobbyists of Washington weren't necessarily embroiled in. So there's that difference. But basically, you're right. I mean, the U.S. attorney sent shivers of fear down everybody with count 2 of her indictment, where she said he was guilty of buying excessive meals and entertainment for congressmen, and everybody's saying, wait, what's excessive? So yes, he's the reason he is so scary is not the ways he's different, it's the way he just did business as usual, and he was so extreme that he's become toxic, and also he has emails, so you can prove the elusive quid pro quo. Lobbyist does favors for congressmen.
Well, this is the great problem with email in general.
Right. But they had a handle to get in and get his emails because they had him on this Miami case.
Yeah.
So, where he is pleaded guilty. So it's the rare case where the quid pro quo has been proved, but the other thing is it may taint ordinary business practices. The second thing is, can you do anything about it? Bruce Reed actually refers to a DLC paper where he proposes a list of reforms that are not cosmetic reforms. And my attitude is we shouldn't be cynical about these reforms. He says instead of the 1-year waiting period before you can lobby, there should be a 4-year period. Well, if you had a 4-year period, that would be pretty much reduce dramatically the incentive to go through the revolving door.
Basically.
Sorry?
You'd have to find another line of work, basically.
Right. He would, by statute, what we want is the situation where if you leave the employ of a congressman and go, you don't see your future career as lobbying that congressman, which is now the routine in Washington. The big cultural shift, Charlie Peters says, is it used to be vaguely disreputable to leave public service and go become a lobbyist. Now people enter public service with the express goal of becoming a lobbyist, and the Republicans have turned that into a virtue with this K Street project where they want you to come back and lobby them. So you want to break that cycle, and you want to have two ways of making a living. One, public service. Two, lobbying. And hopefully a fairly discreditable, sort of shamed profession of lobbying. And you want to draw a dividing line so people don't go from one to the other. And I think, if you could really hold up a 4-year ban, that might do the job. It wouldn't completely do the job, but it would go a long way to sort of seeding the culture change we need. I'm cynical because so much of Washington's economy, all the good restaurants, for example, all the skyboxes at the Redskins game, depend on this corrupt culture of influence peddling. So, how will you ever extirpate it? I don't know. But reform would help. If the Republicans are shamed into reform, as Bruce Reed says, you shouldn't look askance at a deathbed conversion.
No, they may well be. There's another angle on this story.
Okay.
The little I read, which was just the first few paragraphs of a Los Angeles Times story, revealed to me that you and Jack Abramoff share a hidden bond, if you know what I'm talking about.
Well, we do. We're both Normans.
Well, you're both what?
We're both Normans. That means we both went to Beverly High.
I was just going to say, you went to the same high school. I wasn't going to mention the name of the high school in the event that you're embarrassed about it, but you've gone ahead. And you both played football for Beverly Hills High, right?
Well, I was a lousy tackle on the B football team, and I think he was sort of a more substantial presence.
Mm-hmm.
But yes.
And does that give you any insight?
Gives me no insights.
Oh.
There's a story in the Los Angeles Times that said he bench pressed in 4 power lifts. He lifted 2,700 pounds, which turns out to be more than Arnold Schwarzenegger ever lifted. So, my line is no. I have no insights.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Anything else on?
I don't think so. I mean, there is something to be said for Washington lobbyists, and here's what it is. Washington lobbying is not like regular lawyering. You don't monolithically defend a client. You have conflicting interests. So they're trying to get Abramoff because he took money from two sides, from a tribe and a tribe he was lobbying against. Well, sometimes that's efficient because it's much more efficient to make a decision inside the brain of one Washington wise man than it is to hash everything out in court with, completely monomaniacal lawyers and an allegedly neutral judge. So power brokers do serve a function that regular sort of I serve only my client lawyers
But
don't.
who's the power broker in this case? Now, you're saying he's accepting money from conflicting special interests.
Well, it's sort of a pay or play. You pay to get a piece of Abramoff, like you paid to get a piece of Bob Strauss or Edward Bennett Williams,
right,
who famously once represented 3 sides to a transaction, and then they make a decision that sort of takes your decisions. It's a non-zero sum game. So
the
they
lobbyist
make
makes the decision.
Well, the lobbyist in cahoots with his congressional patron makes some sort of decision that keeps everybody
So you mean
happy.
because he's getting money from both sides, he just kind of defaults and decides the case on its merits?
No, but if you pay to join the game, then at least your interests are considered and generally sort of taken care of in some way.
Well, I see what you mean. I mean, yeah, in a certain sense, it's less pernicious than one side of the debate being overrepresented by money. And in general, you know, the funny thing is, in some ways, he's less sleazy than some, because he apparently has an ideology. Now, he may have lost that along the way. His compass, he may have given up on that. But at one point, he was very much inspired by right-wing ideology. And in a way, that's more laudable than lobbyists who just go to the highest bidder. Although, again, somewhere in the course of his career, I guess he got less strict in that regard.
And the other point is the Peggy Noonan point, which is people hold Republicans to a higher standard. They assume that Democrats, as the party of big government, are also going to be the best at finagling all the powers of government and extorting money from the businesses that are subject to those powers.
No, I think there's a stereotype of Republicans smoking cigars and taking cash from big business. Isn't there?
There is, but historically it has been Democrats. The whole point of the Republican K Street Project was that even after the Republicans took power, most of the big lobbyists were Democrats.
And what is the K Street Project?
The K Street Project is something cooked up by Tom DeLay and Grover Norquist to seed lobbying firms with Republicans on the theory that then they will direct campaign contributions back to Republican candidates. Now, there's one sense in which this was rational, in that it maybe ensured that Republicans maximized their campaign contribution extorting potential while they were in power to prolong their stay in power. Although mainly their power depends on...
So they want to channel ex-Republican officials into lobbying in a systematic way?
Well, no, it's usually their own aides. In other words, instead of... When DeLay took power, he was still dealing with lobbyists who were the holdover Democrats from, decades of Democratic power. He wanted to get his people in there so that then they would steer corporate contributions to him.
Which they would have largely done anyway, right? Once he's in power.
Which they would have largely done anyway. That's right. And so, and the reason a lot of the liberal horror at the K Street Project is phony is that they seem to feel that this will somehow go on after the Democrats re-seize power, which is crazy. I mean, why would businesses keep on giving to Republicans disproportionately once Democrats are the people who have to be bribed?
Yeah.
So it's not like going to keep them in power in perpetuity. It does reflect the sort of sleazy mindset that says, well, it's great to be a lobbyist, you're just part of the Republican machine. But that's what the K Street Project was.
Yeah.
I think Noonan is sort of right. I think the people expect Republicans as the party of limited government to be a little cleaner than the Democrats.
Well, I think Peggy Noonan does. I'm not sure whether people in general do.
Yeah. Okay.
So, looks like the Sharon era is over in Israel.
Yes, unfortunately.
Now, do you mean unfortunately? Are you among the admirers?
No, I'm among the. I mean, there seems to be a consensus of Charles Krauthammer on the right and Chris Hitchens on the.
Wait.
Formerly
I hope the end of
anti-Zionist.
that sentence isn't going to be left when we're talking about foreign policy.
He has a historically anti-Zionist worldview. Yes.
His worldview, I would
And
say,
that's
has been
not
evolving
Charles.
in the last few
That's
years.
not Charles's, but in the article he has on site, he reiterates it. And they all thought that Sharon was the hope to engineer some sort of settlement. And he has a one-man party, and he's very nimble at assembling coalitions. And if he's gone, his one-man party might do much worse.
Well, I think the party may do much worse. It depends. The what's it called? The Kadima Party. This is a new party he founded. It depends partly, I think, on whether people support it as a kind of tribute to him.
Right. It could be an LBJ-like situation where after Kennedy was assassinated, the Democrats surged.
Yeah, and in Israeli history, after Rabin was assassinated, Perez took the helm. Now, in the long run, he did not last, and the ultimate beneficiary was actually Netanyahu, or the longer-term beneficiary.
Right.
And I wouldn't be surprised if somehow Netanyahu wound up benefiting from this, but it is a question mark. I mean, nobody seems confident of what's going to happen. I am not as laudatory of Sharon, of even the new Sharon, as you claim just about everyone is.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I mean, for one thing, I mean, as you know, one complaint I've made before is that in withdrawing from Gaza, he should have at least gone through the motions of negotiation so that it would look like a victory for the Palestinian Authority, so the Palestinian Authority would get the credit on the Palestinian side. Because it was unilateral, Hamas was able to make the case that they chased the Israelis out, and so they wound up benefiting more than they would have from the withdrawal. And I think that was really a fundamental mistake. And I think in general, Sharon has never shown an interest in trying to sustain a more responsible leadership on the Palestinian side. He's been almost indifferent to what's going on the Palestinian side. He probably would have said because there were no grounds for hope or something, or because experience had left him too cynical. But so I think that was, first of all, a mistake so far as Israel's interests are concerned. More generally, I don't give him the kind of Nixon goes to China credit for the reversal. I mean, I think the Gaza policy, all that showed was that he was, that he was not an idiot. I mean, he saw the demographic trends. He saw that within a few years, the total of Arabs in Israel and in the occupied territories were going to exceed the number of Jews in Israel. At which point, all they would have to do is demand the vote, and it would be hard to turn that down. If they said, okay, the country's yours, the territory's yours, now can we vote? That would have been a complete crisis for him and for Israel. And so he said, well, what can we do? Well, he cut Gaza. He cut a very large number of Palestinians out of the equation. He said, we're not claiming Gaza anymore as our territory. So now, if all of the Arabs within the occupied territory plus Israel demand the vote, they're still massively outnumbered. So it was a concession to reality that some in the Likud party are just, I don't know, too blind to see the wisdom of or something. And I don't think it compares with Nixon, where the Nixon going to China was not something he was compelled to do in the short interest on grounds of American self-preservation. It was actually a somewhat creative and far-seeing thing. The other thing is Nixon had not, he had been a Cold Warrior, so it was ironic, but he hadn't single-handedly started the Cold War or been instrumental in it, or even been instrumental in formulating containment. He had exploited a Cold War mentality, but he wasn't an author of the doctrine of containment or anything. Sharon was an author of the settlement policy, whose wisdom he was in effect questioning when he started withdrawing from Gaza. So it was a reversal, but he is responsible for a policy that he was in effect conceding the inadequacy of himself, and which I think has been just disastrous from the point of view of Israel's self-interest.
But that happens that's important if you're writing his obituary and assessing the pluses and minuses of his life.
Well, that's partly we're talking about his legacy.
If you're assessing how much damage it does that he's out of the picture,
they're two different questions.
Yeah, they're two different questions. I made it through several years at the New Republic because of my utter ignorance of the Middle East. So
I started out that way, but then I was asked to write an editorial about Israel, and also I was actually sent to Israel, so I got kind of interested.
The other interesting thing that's come out of this debate, though, I think, is that everybody's talking about, well, Sharon was going to attack Iran and take out their nuclear capability. And previously the debate seemed to assume that this couldn't be done, that the nuclear facilities were all buried and we couldn't get to them, so we had to negotiate. Now everybody assumes that it could be done, and it's just a question of whether Israel will do it or whether they will defer to the United States.
Is that the conventional wisdom?
Well, every article I've seen on Sharon, admittedly I tended to read mainly on the right, has just assumed that it's just a question of who will order the bombers to go in and blow these things up.
I mean, among people who actually analyze the situation in Iran, is there an emerging conventional wisdom that actually these things are not well concealed and they're not widely dispersed?
I don't know, but none of the articles I've read has even bothered to say, assuming that technical obstacles could be overcome. They all assume that it can be done. So that part of the debate is unaffected by these experts if the experts think it can't be done. I just thought there was an interesting shift in the press coverage.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends on whether things move to the right or the left or neither. Nobody seems to know. But you don't contest, or you do contest my analysis of the legacy.
No, I don't contest your analysis of the legacy. You say it's horrible that Hamas took power, yet it's good. Yet they'll be tempered by the fact that they did take power in elections. So it's not clear to me.
Well, no, I'm saying two things. So long as it was plausible that you could empower the Palestinian Authority, which at one point I think it was, and they could command the respect of the overwhelming majority of Palestinians, then that should be your strategy. And so far as I know, that was still conceivable before the Gaza withdrawal. It seems to me it's getting less and less conceivable. And in any event, I think in general, good can come when radicals attain legitimate power through elections. Sometimes they are moderated, and that's something you can hope will happen. In any event, I think trying to impede the elections because Hamas is being allowed to participate would be just another thing that would further antagonize the Palestinian people. And this is the reason the settlement policy was a mistake from the beginning. It has just systematically antagonized people who 30 years ago were fairly secular, if you'll recall. Now it's become, they're much more radically religious and so on. Not that it's been the settlement policy alone, but I think the settlement policy, which Sharon was a founder of, is what makes it so hard to imagine a resolution to this anytime in the near future. And that's why I actually wasn't optimistic even before this happened. I was not optimistic about the policies that everyone envisioned unfolding.
You still have Jerusalem, even if the settlement policy had never happened. It seems a pretty hard nut to decide.
Now, wait, you're saying...
I'm saying that the Sharon
no, but not East
people
Jerusalem.
won't want to give up Jerusalem even if they haven't settled.
Not East Jerusalem, Mickey.
Okay.
East Jerusalem in the pre-67 borders is 100% Palestinian. And now, increasingly, Israel seems not willing to give that up. And that's going to be a huge bone of contention, and that's 100% Ariel Sharon policy. I mean, he's solely responsible for it, but he fully supported the trends that have turned East Jerusalem into a nearly insoluble problem.
I defer to your greater expertise. That's why you had to write the editorials at the New Republic.
Not many of them, but...
I got to write about welfare reform.
And America's better for it.
Okay.
On to something less substantive. Now, with all due respect for your passion for cars, but you're going to talk about cars now, right?
I got to talk about cars. I went to see a lecture by the focus of evil in the automobile world, a guy named Chris Bangle, who is the chief of design for BMW. I think his cars are ugly. It's an aesthetic judgment that many share, but you don't have to decide that. He's one of the great BSers of our time, and he propounded his theory of design, which I thought was interesting. Basically, he says design follows changes in tool-making technology. It also follows architecture. He's a real follower. He's very happy that automotive design caught up to architecture, and that the design of the BMW Z4 finally caught up with Frank Gehry's Bilbao Museum only 6 years after Gehry's building was built. And he also thinks it follows tool-making technology. So if you have CAD, CAM, and computers and multiple axis surfacing and tools that can cut complex shapes, that cars have to have complex shapes. And who knows what other technology will be in the future. Yet at the same time in his lecture, he showed pictures of beautiful women, Audrey Hepburn in particular, as examples of high design. And I thought there was...
Her physique alone and her facial features, not what she was wearing?
Her face. No, it had clothes too.
Oh, okay.
But it was a beautiful woman dressed in fashionable clothes.
Uh-huh.
And my line is that there's a tension between his design philosophy, which is that design keeps changing with technology forever and ever, And this picture of Audrey Hepburn he kept showing, which shows that our aesthetic judgments are in fact rooted in biological imperatives that are imprinted in our genes and are in fact fixed.
Well, but
which would explain why BMW cars, while they have a great theory behind them, seem so ugly, because they're based on this theory that says they should change and change and change. But our genes don't want them to change. Our genes want a car that is smooth and sensuous, like the feminine
on a
form.
car that looks like a woman, or what?
Well, that's the oldest analogy in the book. It's a car that looks like a woman. Look at the Pontiac Solstice; it looks like a woman. It's got the
that could escape my attention, Mickey, but
it's a cliche. If you write that as a car reviewer, you get laughed out of the room.
I can't imagine why.
And it's not because it's wrong. It's because it's so obvious that everybody knows it.
We're going to have to dig up a picture of that for our viewers.
We will.
Well, okay, so...
So I basically argue contra Bengal that our aesthetic judgments are imprinted in our genes, and there's a limit to how much smart, avant-garde people can push them without reaching the limits of our aesthetic.
Well, this is interesting, because I have long observed, to myself at least, that when you write about cars, you reveal yourself to be one of these people who thinks there is absolute aesthetic truth, you know? It's like when I hear two people arguing about art, it just always amuses me that they both think that one of them is right and one of them is wrong, as if there is some platonic realm out there in which these aesthetic truths are engraved, and you should argue about it the way you would argue about whether a runner was out or safe at second base. And you've always struck me as one of those people. Now I understand that two things. You think that these aesthetic truths are kind of based in our genes, and I certainly agree that some aesthetic judgments are. Certainly obvious ones, like we prefer large bodies of clear water to swampy, areas that would be more likely to carry disease and so on. But secondly, you think it's kind of, well, for some reason that makes it legitimate. That makes these judgments legitimate. And there's two ways you could argue that. One of which would involve committing the naturalistic fallacy, which I know you'd never do. I mean, you're just saying we should accommodate the reality of human nature and not try to violate human aesthetic instincts.
I'm saying, first, I'm not pretending there's anything objective about my aesthetic judgment, but I'm saying if you want to be commercially successful, you got to satisfy our instincts, yes.
Yeah.
And that it's a little arrogant to go around saying that, you, the great intellectual, have figured out the next generation of aesthetics, which involves, pockmarked surfaces instead of smooth surfaces, when in fact we have a biological tendency to prefer smooth surfaces. Things like that.
Okay. Well, in that case, though, the market should always correctly decide aesthetic matters, right?
Well, if you're head of a car company, yes, I would think you have to, hew to the market. And there's also a sort of a view of history. In other words, he derided car designers who said, hey, here's a cool little car, isn't that neat? He thinks you have to self-consciously place yourself in the vast sweep of automotive development and say, even if this car is ugly, this is the place it occupies in the Grand Continuum. And I tend to think the Grand Continuum is the product of a lot of designers saying, hey, this is really neat.
So he says because we can do it now, we should. Because we can do these things we couldn't do before, we should.
Yes.
Design-wise.
Yeah, the same way Frank Gehry said, hey, I can do these forms and aren't they neat?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that means that any form you can do is going to be neat.
I think that's true.
But he seems to feel that it is, and if you invent a new machine tool, then you got to come up with a new aesthetic.
Yeah.
Which seems crazy to me. But it was an interesting lecture.
I think you'll naturally experiment with them, but it doesn't mean that you're going to find something that anybody likes. Yeah.
Right, and I also think that there's a biological grounding of aesthetics.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to see this car that looks like a woman.
You'll be blown away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, listen, this is the longest show ever.
Jesus, okay.
Good thing it was so entertaining.
Okay.
So we'll see you next time.
Great.
Okay.
Bye.